Because of the growing success and popularity of current superhero movies, the general populace has become more interested in getting into the comic book medium than ever before. I have seen a few people in the comic book store who are trying to read comics for the first time make the absolute wrong decisions. So today I'm going to tell you on how to get into comics the right way. My name is Joshua C, and today I'm going to give you guys a guide on how to get into comic books the right way based on your situation. Before I give you a guide on how to get into comic books the right way, let me first tell you what is so special with the comic book medium. The comic book medium is a fairly recent way of storytelling, originated in the 20th century and was created by America. This medium is a unique one. Comics is where text and images collide, creating a clear and special way of storytelling. They are read like novels from top to bottom and left to right, but they, unlike books, have a visual aspect to them. Comics is defined by artist Will Eisner as sequential art, which is an art form in which images are arranged in a way that convey information and tell a story. This is what makes comics such a cool and unique medium to read. Another factor that contributes to the distinctiveness of comics compared to other mediums are that the characters are dealt with in a very different way. In comics, characters are passed down from writer to writer, artist to artist, making characters iconic and timeless. Many superheroes have been around for decades and are expected to outlive their creators. Okay, so now that you might be more interested in the comic book medium, let's dive into how to get into comic books. I believe the first thing you should know about comics are the different formats it comes with. The most common and popular format of comics is the single issue. These single issues are released once or twice a month, are only a fragment of the whole story, come under one title, are usually 20 to 30 pages long, and cost around $4 to $5. The most positive thing about buying single issues is that you are more updated than the other people who read comics in other formats. So, if you really hate spoilers and you have the money to buy single issues every month, then go ahead, because it's honestly a fun experience. But that is basically the only pro of reading single issues. And there are a lot more problems. This way of reading comics can be quite hard because you have to go to the comic book store once or twice a month, which can be very time consuming. Buying single issues can also be very costly, especially when you compare it to the next comic book format we're going to talk about, trade paperbacks. Trade paperbacks are a collection of 4 to 6 single issues of a certain title. They tell one or more complete stories and are a cheaper option compared to buying single issues that are sold separately. Trade paperbacks and hardcovers, which are basically the same as trade paperbacks but just in a hardcover form, are the best formats to read comics in, especially for people who haven't read any comic books in their entire life. They are a cheaper option, they're less time consuming, they are more durable than single issues, and are easier to reread. Another comic book format I'm going to talk about is the graphic novel. The basic point of a graphic novel is that they're just one whole story, meaning that the end of the comic book is the end. There is no continuation or story you need to read before reading this type of comic. Graphic novels are also another way for you to read comics seeing as you just buy one trade-sized comic and you're done with the whole story, not needing to get the next issue or the next volume. The last comic book format you could read comics in is the digital format. For the price of a physical comic, whether it be a single issue, trade paperback, hardcover, or graphic novel, you can get a digital comic, usually found and bought online through Comixology. The good thing about reading comics digitally is that you could easily purchase them and have access to them as long as you have your gadget with you. There are usually more discounts in digital comic book websites compared to sales on physical comics. Another good thing about going digital is that you don't need a place to keep your comics. So if you don't have much space in your house, you might consider digital. It's also a good option for people who do not live near a comic book shop, seeing as they can just use their gadgets to buy and read comics. The problem with digital comics, though, is that they do not have resale value, and you cannot have the experience of growing a collection, which is a big part of reading comics. Now, where exactly do you buy comics? Well, the number one and best place to buy physical comics is the comic book shop. The benefit of buying comics in a comic book store is that all types of comic book formats are located there, whereas other places don't have every type of comic. By buying comics in the comic shop, you can also meet other comic book fans you can chat and talk with, have a store owner to recommend you comics depending on what you like. You can support the comic book shop owners and help the comic book industry survive. The next place to buy comics if you don't have a local comic book shop would be the bookstore. The problem with buying comics in a bookstore is that there isn't much comic books to choose from, and there are no single issues in the bookstore. Another viable option would be buying comic books online. There are a lot of different comics you could find online that are fairly priced, and buying comics online is a very convenient process. But buying comics online has a risk. You might get scammed on eBay or receive your comics in a very bad condition. Okay, so now let's talk about digital comics. So if you really like one specific comic book publisher, they probably have a website of their own to buy that company's comics in. But if you like to read comic books from every publisher or any comic book in general, Comixology would be the best option. Since you guys know what type of format of comic you are going to read and where to buy comic books, I think what you guys are all wondering is, among all of the comic books, which ones do I pick? I mean, this is a whole medium. There are hundreds of thousands of comic books that have been published. So, Joshua, what comic books do you think I should get? The thing is, I can't give you that answer because everybody has different opinions on certain things and different preferences. This was the case for me reading All-Star Superman. All-Star Superman is a comic almost everybody praises. And once I read it, sure, it was good, but stories that I read later, like Superman the Red Sun, Superman Secret Identity, Superman Earth 1, Whatever Happened to the Men of Tomorrow, and the list goes on, I felt those comics were kind of better than All-Star Superman. So if I recommend you guys a comic, it might be the wrong one for you. Although I can't give you specific recommendations, I can teach you how to find comics that you would like. The first tip I can give you is to find a character you like from other media and read the comics that were published about them. This way, you would be already familiar with some of the characters and you won't feel like you don't know anything. By the way, take note that not everything from the movies and TV shows will have the exact same scenario when it comes to comics. Because if you think that way, then you probably will be very disappointed. The next step would be if you find a comic book about that character that you just love to death, then track the creators. Not literally, because that's invasion of privacy, but you should just read their other creations. Because if you love a certain creator's work, you might also like their other creations. So those were my tips on how to find the right comic book for you. So now I'm going to give you some guidelines and tips to help you throughout your whole comic book journey. One thing you should have when you're reading comic books is to have a comic book buddy. And if you don't, you should find one because they can give you recommendations. You can just chat about comics in general and you won't feel like you're the only comic book fan. Also, if you don't understand what's happening in the comic book you're reading, you can just Google the comic and everything is basically there. I believe that is all for today. Thank you guys for watching and leave your thoughts down in the comments. If you are already reading comics, tell me how you first got into comic books. And if you didn't understand some stuff that I said, you can ask me questions down below. By the way, guys, sorry if you wanted me to talk about comic book characters and specific comic books. We'll get into that in the next video. So I wanted to make this video because I wanted to give people a guide on how to get into comic books because I want this industry to survive and have seen people make the absolute wrong choices. So basically there is this one guy around my age and I'm pretty sure it was his first time in the comic book store and he bought the Clone Saga. So yeah, that might be his last trip to the comic book store as well. Anyway, if you enjoyed this, please leave a like, and if you want to see more, I recommend you check out my previous video on the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because that is the best video I ever made, at least I've made so far. And if you like this one, you can leave a like, and if you want to see my next video, which will probably be a lot better than this one, subscribe and click the notification bell if you want to receive a notification every time I publish a new video. My name is Joshua C, and I will see you in the next comic book video.